So my name is Tony Berning. I'm with OPSWAT. We've got a table over here at the conference. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how you can use multiple antivirus scanning to protect critical infrastructure. The data that we gathered to put this together, to put this information together, comes from our customers. OPSWAT sells a multi-scanning solution that a number of critical infrastructure operators use to scan and sort of regulate portable media that is brought into their facilities. So taking unknown devices and then scanning them to make sure that they're okay before they're brought into secure areas. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today, I'll go over what I mean by multi-scanning, what that is, spend a little bit of time on that. Then I'll talk about, so from our research, what is shaping the portable media security policies for our customers and people who are operators of critical infrastructure. Part of that will be, part of what I'll cover is how each of those operators are balancing security needs versus business needs. And then how that plays into like common network architecture. So how does this usually set up? What are the common setups that at least that we see with our customers? I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how you can define what is acceptable media, acceptable content, so like what's allowed in and what is not. And then finally, I'm going to try to tie this all together. So how does multi-scanning fit into this? How does the whole picture fit together to create a solid security policy? So starting with multi-scanning. So the problem that multi-scanning attempts to address is that there's exponentially increasing amount of malware out in the wild, so to speak. This is all data taken from avtest.org. It's a third-party organization, but it shows the number of known bits of malware is increasing at an exponential rate. And and this data actually probably is even higher now because this is already a couple months old. But at that, let me know if you can't hear me. I'll try to not use the mic, but if my voice isn't carrying, just let me know. So my name is Tony Berning. I'm with OPSWAT. We've got a table over here at the conference. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how you can use multiple antivirus scanning to protect critical infrastructure. The data that we gathered to put this together, to put this information together, comes from our customers. OPSWAT sells a multi-scanning solution that a number of critical infrastructure operators use to scan and sort of regulate portable media that is brought into their facilities. So taking unknown devices and then scanning them to make sure that they're okay before they're brought into secure areas. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today, I'll go over what I mean by multi-scanning, what that is, spend a little bit of time on that. Then I'll talk about, so from our research, what is shaping the portable media security policies for our customers and people who are operators of critical infrastructure. Part of that will be, part of what I'll cover is how each of those operators are balancing security needs versus business needs. And then how that plays into like common network architecture. So how does this usually set up? What are the common setups that at least that we see with our customers? I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how you can define what is acceptable media, acceptable content, so like what's allowed in and what is not. And then finally, I'm going to try to tie this all together. So how does multi-scanning fit into this? How does the whole picture fit together to create a solid security policy? So starting with multi-scanning. So the problem that multi-scanning attempts to address is that there's exponentially increasing amount of malware out in the wild, so to speak. This is all data taken from avtest.org. It's a third-party organization, but it shows the number of known bits of malware is increasing at an exponential rate. And and this data actually probably is even higher now because this is already a couple months old. But at least by the beginning of the year, there's over 220,000 new malware variants every day that are recognized.
Can I ask a quick question regarding
Sure. Yeah.
So, sorry.
No, actually, yeah. And everyone interrupts. You know, we can try to make this interactive.
So this is a trend that's been going on for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
More and more malware.
Yep.
And they all sort of well agree with that name. But is the malware not only increasing, and is it also doing other things? And if so, what are those things?
So I think that what we've seen is that as it's almost like it's a cat and mouse game. So as different antivirus engines, as different like sandbox producers, different types of analysis and protection tools have identified ways of blocking malware. It's an arms race. So anyone who's trying to write malware is producing more and more sophisticated products. Essentially, it's a product that they're producing. So I think that now what you'll see is there's a lot more resources also going into it. So it's not necessarily always a single like rogue hacker somewhere who's just doing it for fun or trying to grab some money. But you see large organizations that are much more organized. They've got entire development teams that are working on creating very targeted malware that's going after a specific organization and going after very specific data. So I think that in addition to just the amount of it that's out there, it's also, it's getting more complex. So each antivirus engine has its strengths and its weaknesses. And this is just talking about some of the reasons why there's differences between the detection rates of different engines. One is that each has its own proprietary heuristics that it uses to detect malware. Each has their own proprietary database. Although some of that information is shared, that's the competitive advantage for a lot of antivirus engines. What plays into that also is how frequently that database is updated. And then also the final point I'd like to mention, because it's not always necessarily intuitive, is that a lot of times the geographic location of the research labs does play into it, because it affects what types of samples those researchers are getting their hands on. So then the question is, why multi-scanning? Why use multiple engines? There's the three main areas. One is the first bullet point I have here is to increase the rates of detection for 0-hour attacks. So this is because this relies mostly on signatures, because on heuristics, because signature databases aren't useful for new attacks. But when you have a lot of different engines all using different heuristics, you're more likely to have one that is detecting a new threat. The second is decreasing the amount of time after an outbreak, because as a virus spreads, as it becomes more known, different engines providers will add it to their signature databases. And so by using multiple engines, you actually have the effective time of whichever engine is the quickest to add it to their signature database. Now, the final point is that is to actually increase your resiliency to any malware that is specifically attacking engines themselves. So this is, by having multiple engines that are all using different methods and run a little bit differently, it's unlikely that a single piece of malware will be able to take down all of those engines. This is just another way of visualizing it, but the vast majority of things that are detected are in common between different engines, but there is a little bit of unique detections that each engine has. And so by adding more and more engines, you get closer and closer to the 100% detection rate. Although you'll never, ever, reach 100% exactly. It's another way of visualizing it. In this case, we have 75 different threats and 6 different engines that you go across. And just the combination of all of them, shown by the last column, is much better than any of the individual engines. It's just another way of saying that no engine is, you can't just pick the best engine and use that. So as I mentioned, there's antivirus engines around the world. A lot of them will do better for threats that are originating in their areas, but in addition to having their headquarters around the world, a lot of these engine providers have multiple research labs around the world specifically to address this concern about being able to detect threats that originate in different areas. So when it comes to how operators of critical infrastructure define their security policies, we've noticed like several different factors playing into it. There's regulatory bodies and groups that will define requirements. There's industry working groups, and then also there's the internal security teams that all play a role in defining the security policies. So for the regulatory bodies, there are both governmental bodies, there are industry bodies, and there's state, local bodies at times that all have an impact on what requirements an operator needs to meet. So some examples, this is NIST will set broad standards and frameworks for cybersecurity. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission provides a little bit more detailed requirements for what each of the operators need to implement. But there's lots of groups that may affect each a specific operator. And these regulations can cover a lot of different areas. Some is types of media that are allowed. So, for instance, in the federal government, USBs aren't allowed at all to be brought in. Virus scanning requirements. Some operators are required to scan with multiple antivirus engines. Anything that's brought into their facility. There's also requirements on logging so that things can be audited and traced back. Just in case something is found later, you can see when it entered the network. And then finally, there are requirements around authentication. So which users are allowed to bring in which types of data or which types of devices. The way that industry working groups, what we've actually seen with a lot of our customers is that there's another heavy influence is industry working groups. So there are regular groups that are, each operator is trying to implement requirements and standards. And so there are usually regular working groups where people meet to talk about how they've met certain milestones and what they've put in place. This could, so it talks about what works, what doesn't, what are the best practices for implementing security policy, and then also even the implementation details in terms of specific solutions, specific products that may meet the requirements. Finally, on top of all of this, every operator has its own teams that are experts in the field and security experts, and they also impact the definition of security policies, just due to their expertise and their own knowledge. So one of the main problems is how to balance the need for high security with the need for people to still be able to get their work done. So one way to look at what's the cost of security is that you have to pay for the security solution. You have to pay for maybe consulting services to implement this policy and this and whatever you are putting in place to increase the security. And then there's the infrastructure costs themselves, potentially additional network equipment, routers, servers, anything that you need to put in place in order to have that extra security. There's also some cost to productivity as you make people go through, one way is to jump through different hoops or follow different processes to increase security. That does reduce the amount of time that they can spend doing their day job. There's also the cost of training, paying for trainers, and also to the time it takes to train employees on how to follow security policies. And then, as you're putting more systems in place, there's potentially more systems that can fail. So these are all costs that need to be factored in. However, on the other side, there's also the potential costs, if you don't implement the right security policy. So if you do get an infection, you can have system downtime, which has its productivity costs, whether it's facilities or plants that have to be taken offline and can't operate, or people that are unable to get their work done. There's also the cost of removing and remediating any potential malware infection. It's also the impact to your reputation. There's lawsuits are a threat if it's found that that an operator did not fully implement the most secure policy that they were aware of. And finally, information that is lost. So whether if it's something that allows information to be extracted, it could be classified information, it could be personal information, sensitive corporate information. All of these are the potential costs. So all of this needs to be weighed against each other. One way I like to illustrate it is that what you really don't want is you don't want to basically turn everyone's system, especially laptops that need to be taken in and out of facilities, into just so locked down that it's impossible for people to do their job. Then you just have an expensive paperweight. You need to make sure that people are able to still be productive, although it's in a secure way. So in the next section, I'll talk about a few of the different setups, a few of the different implementations that we've seen at our customers and how they have tried to balance the needs for security as well as being able to get things done in an efficient way. One way, and this is it's a little bit more focused on our solutions, but if you need to scan portable media as it's coming into a secure facility, one way is to have individual scanning stations that are completely isolated from the network. So there's no threat of those systems getting contaminated at all. However, then if you're scanning for viruses, you need to have a way to update those definitions. So since they are, by definition, not attached to the network, you have to go to each of those individual stations and update the virus definitions. So if you open it up a little bit more, you can have those systems on an isolated network and have them connected to a management station that's able to push out updates to those systems. So instead of having to go to each individual system, you can keep them all up to date, both software and virus definitions, from a single system. However, you do still need to go across the air gap and take virus definitions from your source, so it's the internet or some other source, and move them over to the secure network. Opening up a little bit more, you can have the scanning server itself pulled out of the kiosk, so the scanning stations. And in this case, you only need to update one system. This can still be in an isolated network without a connection to the internet, but you only have to update one system. And as you make it easier and easier to update systems, it's more and more likely, it's more and more feasible to update these systems regularly. So you're more likely to have the latest definitions and the latest software updates. And finally, you could then take that system and connect it directly to the internet, where although, again, a lot of this depends on the balance of what the specific needs and requirements are, but this allows you to have the most up-to-date definitions for virus definitions as well as software updates, instead of having to wait for the manual process of having the updates get pushed to the server. So again, it's a balance of trading off complete disconnected servers versus having something that's updated more often. Another aspect to designing these security policies that we've seen is a focus on what's allowed and what's not. So one thing that needs to be defined is what types of media are allowed. So this could, again, I mentioned before how USBs, we've seen those be completely not allowed because of potential threats. Also, mobile phones a lot of times are not allowed because they can bring in threats, and there's lots of things that can hide out in mobile phones. One of the things that is actually even sometimes more important is allowing read-write media versus read-only media, where read-only media is seen as a little bit safer. But then also whether things are encrypted, whether you get devices with multiple partitions. Although encrypted devices may be more secure for the data that's on it, it could potentially also harbor malware. And so we've seen some of our customers like not allow anything that's encrypted in because it can't be as effectively scanned. Something similar for file types too. Policies can be set to only allow the file types that are deemed necessary or have a low enough risk to warrant them being brought in. There's the same considerations in terms of things being encrypted or having embedded objects, but even at a simpler level, if you know that people don't need to be bringing in executables or binaries, then you can block those and filter those before they are brought in. This can also be modified depending on the individual bringing files in. So you may want to allow somebody, the head of security, to bring in executables, but somebody like a visiting vendor sales rep can only bring in like flat text files, for instance, or just Office documents. You can also implement blacklisting or whitelisting. In a way, signature-based virus detection is a form of blacklisting, but an even more secure way is to actually implement whitelisting, where you only allow in specific files or things from specific sources that you trust. So this can be even more secure than looking for threats, is only allowing in the things that you want to bring. You already know are okay. So then, to tie this all together, what we've seen as the most effective way of addressing this problem or this challenge for operators is to combine a number of these different approaches. So, especially like focusing on although our business is multi-scanning, we realize that sometimes multi-scanning specifically is not enough because of zero-day attacks where you may not have the signature, all the engines may not have the signature. So what we always recommend is that our multi-scanning solution is just part of a larger process. So put a lot of stuff on here, but this is just, so I'll walk through it quickly. But what we recommend